Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbites. Joining me remotely is Jim Salsgiver, who, oh, Jim, there are so many things to read here. Ready to hear this. This guy is so amazing. He's the manager of S Squared Consultants, a member of the Taconic and Green Regional School District Board, chair of the Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union, board member and treasurer of Vermont School Board Association, VSBA representative on Vermont Pension Investment. That I'd like to talk to you about VPIC. I'm very involved with VPIC. And the topic tonight is independent schools and tuitioning dollars approved recently for religious schools. So welcome, Jim. I'm glad that we're here and we've got quite the topic.
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate you having me on board here.
Yeah, no, this is really great, and we've already had a brief discussion the other day, and I was very excited to have this talk because I think it's very complicated, as you said, and a lot of people just don't understand it all, and I count myself in as one of them. Can you share a little bit about your background, and do you ever go home?
Well, I am home right now, but
well, that's good.
actually, I have to, after finishing up on this, I have to go to my select board meeting where I'm on my select board as well. But no, I've been involved with, schools have been one of my primary interests for a lot of years. I joined our local school board back in 2008, and we went through, and I think we'll probably discuss a little bit later, we went through a number of years along that line. I've always been on the supervisory union board. Then I became chair of the supervisory union, and then we merged together under Act 46 to create a new district. And about that time, I decided that I was interested in doing something more at the state level as well on education. So I became one of the Bennington representatives on the Vermont School Board Association board. And that was back in about 2018, and I've been on that for a while and very involved. And, which is a lot of fun because, you get very involved at your local level. And we're going to be talking about some of that tonight at the local level, watching over your education system. But it's really helpful to have the context of what's going on around the state and how different people around the state view issues with education.
And I'm very pleased that you said you are a proponent of public schools, because I must say a few of the shows I have done on independent schools and that conversation, people are much more are supportive of choice and the independent schools. But it's good to hear somebody's, got the public schools.
Well, I think when you're on the school board and involved from that perspective, you almost have to be a proponent of public schools. And I think we make a real effort to have our public schools do a great job for our kids. But I'm from a region that it's the Bennington-Rutland, which interestingly enough, that we actually have we have towns in our school district from Bennington County, Rutland County, Windham County, and Windsor County.
Wow.
It's a big district. We cover 460 square miles. And the really interesting thing, so it's a very big district, and within that full Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union footprint, we operate no high schools. So, and we never have, and that's one of the interesting things about about this issue, the Carson v. Macon and all, is that for a district like ours where we don't operate a high school, so we've been tuitioning out all of our students, that led us to, the truth be told, Burton Academy is our primary high school.
Right.
And Burton actually existed before the public schools existed. Huh. So it's always been a part of our system. And we figured out how over the years to make the combination of public schools and independent schools work for our families and our kids. And our view is that it works extremely well. So I'm a public school proponent who also believes that independent can provide a lot to our kids.
Well, it sounds like there's room for both, and this is such a huge area. I've never heard of the Taconic and Green Regional School District. I know I have never when I actually used. I first saw it said Green Regional School, and then I did some. I went on the internet and I saw Taconic. I said, now where did that come from? But it's all one.
Well, that's our merged name. We
Yeah,
used to
right.
be the Dorset School District and Manchester School District
Oh, wow.
and Danby and Mount Tabor and Sunderland.
And here we are.
And so we had to come up with some name when we all came together.
And there's never been a discussion about having a public high school in this mix?
You know, honestly, that's never really, there's never been any push or interest. The honest truth is, our area, our communities, view Burton as a great asset. And you know, in our communities, a lot of families come to our area because you know they think we do K-8 education pretty well as well. But you know, the 9 to 12 through Burton, it's a draw to our community.
Right. That's well, if it ain't broke, as
And
they say.
yeah, and you know, the support is very significant. We're gonna, you know, the issue of how independent schools fit into education in Vermont has been a long-standing issue for decades.
Right.
And the last time it became very significant in our area was a few years back when they were rewriting the rules that cover independent schools. And that's called Rule Series 2200. And there was some concern that they were really trying to pare back the impact of independent schools back then.
Right.
And we had the State Board of Education hold a let's hear from the community meeting that ended up being held at the Burton in the gym, where over 800 residents came to tell the State Board of Education that they really like their school system as it is. So
right. So back off.
There's a lot of support.
Yeah, that's great. I would love. I know you're very up on all of the what's happening in the courts. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the state, actually of Maine, was unlawfully discriminating against the religious schools, and that's the Carson-Macon. And then we had apparently 2 cases here in Vermont involving school tuition and religious discrimination, and the same outcome came from that we should be giving public monies to religious schools. Could you talk about Carson and Macon and how it all fits in? Because there's a lot of people, myself included, who really don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, it's historically in the state of Vermont, there had been a view that, you know, constitutionally in the Vermont Constitution, there was a separation of church and state. And so for many years, there's been the discussion about, you know, what does that mean with respect to, and here the question, when you say religious schools, that can mean a lot of different things, because you can have a school that was founded by a religion, but it, you know, pretty much operates like any other school. You can have schools where they believe that every element of the education of their kids needs to tie into religion, and they, you know, that have requirements that, you know, kids have an extremely heavy religious element to their education. You know, I haven't been able to figure it out, but we've had schools that told us that, you know, 100% of their math curriculum is tied into religion, and I have a hard time understanding quite. But the issue of, you know, religion for years, the standard sort of in Vermont was that districts like ours, that, you know, the interesting point is, you know, most school districts, most places, and even in Vermont, actually operate schools from kindergarten through grade 12. And if you're operating a school in all grade levels, then you aren't actually paying tuition to anybody, because all those kids are expected to go to your schools as long as you can serve them in your schools. So the only place where tuitioning really comes up is when you don't operate those certain grades. Like in our case, we don't operate grades 9 to 12. and then you're paying tuition to, and historically we've paid tuition essentially to basically, at a certain level of payment to basically, for parents to send their kids wherever they want to send their kids. And that's changed a little bit over time, but one of the disqualifying factors in the past that led to, things like Carson v. Macon is that a school that was deemed to primarily, have a primary focus on religion and education was not deemed to be a school that you could pay tuition to. And so we were paying tuition to a whole lot of, a variety of schools. Most of our kids go to Burton, but well over 90%. But, we were paying to a lot of other schools, but in the past, we didn't pay to schools. We would do a review and say, is this school primarily a school for religious education versus general education?
Right.
And then we wouldn't pay them. Now, Carson v. Macon, Carson v. Macon was a Maine case.
Right.
And that's significant because Maine and Vermont have very similar education systems where, we're both widespread out geographically. And, through history, there are a lot of school districts in Maine and Vermont that don't operate all grades. And they kind of share, by paying tuition, they share resources with other schools. And Maine and Vermont are kind of unusual from that perspective. Most states districts operate schools. But in Maine and Vermont, since those are two places where this issue of not paying to religious schools was considered a very significant one by a lot of folks, and so the target of legal action. And Carson v. Macon, got to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they made a determination that religious schools, are deciding that we would pay tuition to Burton, but we wouldn't pay to a school that was deemed to be a religious education. That was discriminating against those schools. And honestly, we've had discussions internally, and people have different views on it and all, but from our school district and all, we kind of accept that's the decision, and so that's what we have to operate under. And so we're trying to figure out how to move forward on that. And I think that's what the Vermont legislature is doing as well. How do you move forward with a new set of rules?
Right. Well, we've discussed this. I've told you that we think there's a movement afoot to perhaps curtail some independent schools. And I know that one of the chair of the Senate Education Committee put in a bill, and it will be reintroduced this year, that will require the religious schools, I'm going to say this right, to document that the money they were given was only used for secular education and not for religious education. And
Yeah,
I don't.
that bill, that was Brian Campion of Senate
Yeah,
Ed,
right.
and he's actually he's my senator, one of my senators. And our district actually supported S219. Taconic and Green sent a letter asking other people to get on board with S219. The way we viewed S219 was different. It was what it was trying to do is say that if you're going to pay tuition dollars to a school, then one of the key elements is that they need to meet the non-discrimination requirements that we viewed as that as a core element, that it was an issue of discrimination. The concern was because honestly, within our district, there's not so concern about the religious education. It's a concern about making sure that the kids are getting the education that we'd want them to have in different subjects, but also a concern that the schools that we send our kids to are open to kids from different backgrounds, kids with different interests, kids with it's sort of the protected classes In law, we view that, schools should be open to everybody in any protected class.
Right.
And that's a lot of what S219 was focused on and why we supported it.
Right.
And, it's interesting because currently S219 was trying to put that into law. There's already something very like that, which was a change that only became effective June of 2022, which is there's the law that sets out how schools have to operate. But then for independent schools, there's a different structure, and that's a set of rules that were set up by the Vermont by the State Board of Education, and that's called Rule Series 2200, which is a set of rules that define, okay, what do you need to do to become an approved school to receive public dollars. And the thought with S219 was that, one, Rule Series 2200 until June of 2022 didn't really have a very strong non-discrimination element to it. And in June 30th, 2022, their new provisions became effective that focused on discrimination as, essentially non-discrimination being an important element of getting an approval for a school.
Interesting.
But, the feeling, one of the reasons we supported S219 was, okay, there was that coming into the rules to get approval as an independent school, but rules are a whole different animal than laws. And so we felt that it would be useful for the law through S219 to essentially take the same position on non-discrimination.
I just was, by the way, Brian is an excellent chair. I'm sure you know that. He's a very good chair.
Yep.
I monitor his committee a lot with other stuff I do, and he is one of the better chairs. But I don't know how schools would be able to document what is and isn't, how that money is and isn't spent. But I'm hoping that there's some kind of guidance that's out there.
Yeah, and that's one of the tough things here. One of the things I have a hard time understanding is, our district, because we don't operate some grades, we tuition for those grades. Most school districts in Vermont operate all grades, so this whole bit of tuitioning and having to pay to religious schools, they see is sort of a non-issue for them, because they don't have to tuition to anybody else, and religious or not.
Right.
But there are a number of places, like ours, and honestly, you've got 4 historic academies, St. Johnsbury and all, in addition to Burn Burton.
Right.
Those communities, for the most part, don't have high schools. Then there are districts that don't have certain grades in grade school or in elementary school. So there are a number of districts where this is relevant, but a lot of districts where it really isn't. But everybody has an opinion on this.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is sort of interesting.
Well, I was laughing when you said that you heard that there are some religious schools that teach religion in math. And I went to one of those schools in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and I could give you examples of how we learned math by counting priests and nuns. And I swear that was that's not really teaching religion, but it's counting heads,
Yeah.
I guess. So I laughed when you said that, because I lived through that for a couple of years. And so I don't know, I would hope the legislature would give some guidance of how to prove that. I get why he put the bill in, but
I think that's one of the reasons it's so tough. We're actually talking to all our local legislators, staying in close touch with them.
yeah,
Including, Kath James, who's now in a leadership position,
She's
who
great.
was on House Ed last year, and others. And our real concern has been that we get the impression that there are some people out there who, and I would guess this is a lot of those districts where this isn't really an issue because they operate all grades.
Right.
And they've decided that, well, to deal with this issue, the best thing to do would be to stop paying tuition to any independent schools. And when we started hearing that there was a movement within the legislature and, talking to some people about, gee, it's important that if you're considering a move like that, you have to understand that, we've got like 650 kids going to high school here.
Right.
We don't have high schools to take them if we don't have independent schools.
Right.
And so, the idea of just, gee, you can't pay tuition to any independent schools anymore, and that'll solve the whole problem, it actually creates a massive problem for districts like
For
ours.
sure. Do you have a tech
And,
center in your district or no? A tech center?
pardon me?
Do you have a technical center?
Oh, we actually use the one down in Bennington. Actually, that's one thing. I wish we had a stronger tech school connection, because right now it's a little far down the road to Bennington or up to
Right.
Rutland for the tech centers, because the tech centers do a wonderful job.
They do.
But honestly, where a school like Burton, they sort of recognized that gap, so they've actually filled in a lot of that within their own curriculum.
Good.
So they, that's one of the things that I've grown to appreciate about a school like Burton is they serve our community, supports them because they serve our community and recognize the needs of the kids, and they do a pretty good job of partnering with our district to make sure that we actually coordinate on a variety of programs that are for kids that are not necessarily on the standard stream.
Right.
And we work together on those, so that it started out actually with Burton having some programs for those kids to make sure their goal is to have everybody graduate, and they're pretty darn close to that.
That's a great goal.
And so it is. And so, part of it was making sure that, for kids who are going to go an alternate path when they're at high school at Burton, making sure that we have the ability in our middle school grades, like, 6, 7, 8, to kind of start moving them in the direction of being able to make that path theirs.
I'm a big proponent of technical education. There are some kids who just need that hands-on, and that's how they learn best. And our businesses are desperate for technical employees, people that get the technical aspect of things. And
I agree 100%.
Yeah, and they
Yep.
make good money too. It's not like they're making low wages. Those trades are big paying jobs.
Exactly. I mean, some of the best jobs in Vermont are
Right.
jobs that that a technical education would be put kids, make them more prepared for some of the best paying jobs in the state of Vermont. So.
Absolutely, that's so true. Anyway, so next week is the school choice week. Is that just bigger, not just specific to your area, but the bigger picture of school choice? Do you think there's room for school choice, and it's good to have all choices for kids? Because my thing is, not every kid learns the same. I am a disaster in the teacher-student, teacher 300 people in an auditorium. That's not me.
Yeah. Well, we've, in our area, interestingly, I brought up Burton a number of times, but right in my town of Dorset, a number of years ago, a school sprouted up called the Long Trail School.
Oh,
And
yes.
Long Trail School is a great school that actually it has become, it's a very good choice for a lot of parents who see their kids fitting better into the teaching approach at Long Trail than at Burton. And it's interesting because actually when Long Trail came into being, it was, I think there were some people who said, I'm saying great things about Burton, but there were some people who were thinking that Burton maybe wasn't all that it was, was supposed to be. And so different, and that allowed Long Trail to develop as a very, it's been a successful and a great school that provides a great education for. And if you talk to the headmaster of Burn, he'll tell you that actually Long Trail being there forced Burn to be a better school.
Excellent
Because,
competition.
there's so we as far as school choice, most, the vast majority of our kids go to Burton, then the second largest number of kids to Long Trail. Then we have, a smattering of kids that go a variety of different places, after that. But, we have been great believers in our districts of, that choice being a real positive thing for families.
That's great.
And, it doesn't always work perfectly, but I think our communities are very much in support of continuing school choice,
That's great.
and they're very concerned about the possibility that could be chipped away.
Yeah, well, I think the religious school issue just got some people pretty upset, and because it's, separation of church and state and blah, blah, blah. I sort of get it, but on the other hand, if it works for a kid, it's about the kids. So
Yeah.
you've got to put them where they will thrive and succeed.
And I think we've, it's interesting that we as a board, we took a position back at a meeting back in November, that when this whole thing came up, where as a board we passed a motion that said, the Taconic and Green School Board supports our educational system as currently written in our laws and is currently practiced in our district. So we wanted to make a statement that, we like what we have, and we've made a decision at our last board meeting just last week, to actually place something on the ballot for the Taconic and Green annual meeting warning, that essentially, we're asking the community. It's a similar sort of concept where we bring up 4 points that, we think our system works well, and that, continuing it would be to our benefit. We decided, we as a board can sit around the table and decide this is what we think should be, but we thought it was important enough to actually take it out to our voters and have them, as an advisory item, have them tell us whether they agree or not.
That's
great. So,
and they would
appreciate
that.
Hopefully, but it's, as you said from the top, it's a complicated issue, and a lot of people end up sort of tuning out.
Well, I don't have any children in school, thank goodness. I'm a little too old for that. But I went to all of the meetings about the mergers and all that stuff, because I needed to understand it just for my own sanity. And there were a lot of people that showed up at those meetings, which I was very pleased. And I was surprised, because you go to school board meetings, and if you get 4 people, you're thrilled. But these meetings, people came out, there was sometimes standing room only, and no decisions were being made by the people, but they just wanted to understand it. How did your meetings go with the Taconic Green, that merger?
Our process went really well, and I think that it was very open. We communicated a whole lot to the communities, and in the end, our drew together. At the time that was happening, I understand people being on both sides, thinking that you're forcing us to do something we don't want to do. It's not in the best interest of our kids. We saw it pretty early on as something that could have pluses for our area, and it has. It really has worked out well. But again, being on the VSBA board, the School Board Association board, that was something that was sort of ripping apart the VSBA to some extent, because there were a lot of members who felt that Act 46 that forced mergers was the worst thing that ever happened in the world.
Wow.
And so it's tough to navigate something like that when people feel so emotional about it. And you know, honestly, there are probably some areas where mergers weren't the best thing in the world.
Right.
But I think there are a whole lot of places where mergers worked out pretty well, and most people are comfy with it.
You know, we had
But
talked about, no, go ahead.
no, there's still people who are upset about Act 46 and the mergers today, and I can understand that, because you know, it's a matter of sort of local control and feeling that that you know what's best for your kids. It's just, you know, to me, I think, you know, more people should have had a slightly more open mind to trying to make it work.
Right.
You know, and there are probably some places where it doesn't work, you know.
Yeah. Well, I know in Maine, didn't they do this and then there was a big effort to undo it, because they didn't feel it worked for them in Maine. And I think a lot of us here were like, whoa, is that what's going to happen here? Because they spend a lot of time reversing what they did.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
Oh,
don't,
it I do understand that. I don't know a whole lot about that
I don't either.
situation, but I think that a lot of they're there
There were a
because
couple of things that I was opposed to with how they handled the merger. Like if a school had a lot of debt, everybody had the debt. On the other hand, if
right,
we have a district that had a lot of money put aside, and we all got that money, and I thought that was just wrong. And they lost all that money that they had put aside. It got shared. And I thought, that's not
yeah,
our money. We shouldn't have that. But it's the way it
right.
went. I just found
Well,
that strange.
we had one district that had a lot of money, so they actually they interestingly they spent it all
Ah.
on things that made sense, that actually then brought down their tax rate dramatically.
Huh.
And then there was a limit on how much the tax rate could go up every year. So actually that town benefited. You know, we
Oh,
figured out a way to make it
huh.
work for them.
This town I'm talking about should have thought of that, because I felt so guilty that we were taking their money. I thought this is not right. You know, you mentioned taxes, and somebody told me that, and I don't understand this, that there's an issue about how taxes are collected if the school monies flow differently by designate. What is that all about? Do you know what that comment
I,
was
I,
meant?
I'm not exactly sure. You know, you kind of mentioned before, and
Yeah.
I'm not really quite sure how that is. You know, school taxes, you know, like with, well, you know, you tend to have a one size fits all system,
Right. It
and
doesn't.
so I don't really know how, you know, changing the setup of the schools would change the
Okay.
taxes too much.
Yeah, I didn't understand the statement. So, um, and I don't see there. Is there much savings in all of these mergers? Have you seen, or is there much savings in merging? Have we saved money?
Oh, savings?
You know,
Um,
lower
you know,
costs. No.
you know, I think that that may have been oversold, you know, the savings. What it really saved individual districts from was, we used to have, when we were a tiny little, you know, single town school district, if we had anything significant happen in a year just to our students, including, well, if we had anything significant happen, our tax rate could be going, you know, bouncing around like crazy.
Right.
One of the benefits we have is that, you know, it created a lot more stability in tax rates for all the different towns. And, you know, we also, since we viewed it as a positive, you know, we have towns that are in better shape financially, economically, and others that aren't. But, you know, we very quickly sort of coalesced around the idea that we actually had a saying with our merger, which is, all our kids are all our kids.
Nice.
And so you know, the truth is, if one of our schools needs more resources, they're our kids too, and that's where we put them. You know, where the resources are needed, and I've been really pleased that, you know, as long as the merger's been there, that's continued to be the attitude of all the towns.
That's great.
There isn't sniping about this school getting more money than that school.
So the students and parents have pretty much stepped up and and accepted the way things are. That's good.
Yeah, and I think we've really tried hard to have open communications with our towns, which when this came about, we actually hired a person. It's not very expensive, but we hired somebody who was, had come up here, retired from doing a great job of community, elsewhere. And so I hired a person just to help us make sure we're communicating with the public enough.
Yeah. People just want to be heard, right?
Yep.
They just want to make
Absolutely.
sure you know what they're feeling. Maybe not, you don't do it, but at least you know how they're feeling and can address it. That's good.
Yeah.
So I know you're saying we didn't lower the cost too much, but have we improved the educational system? Do you think that things have improved?
I think that we definitely have, and one of the ways we've done that is we're now, it's interesting. The Taconic Green operates 5 schools, and those schools used to all, and that's true, 9 towns operating 5 schools, and those schools used to always operate essentially as silos, and they didn't really very much. As soon as we put the whole system together, the 4th grade teachers from all were getting together periodically to talk about, how they reach their kids.
Great.
And I think and then, support resources, we share. I think, we really, I think we did improve things just by, it's funny when you've got a school that's a K-8 school we've got one with like a little over 100 kids in it, another, with 200 kids in it, and you're trying to operate a school with 200 kids or 100 kids.
Right.
It's really hard, but we get a little bit of benefit from size just by being able to pull together resources and pull together knowledge.
Which is the way it's supposed to be, I think. That's great. Good for you.
Yeah.
That's great to hear that they're working together because they can learn from each other too and maybe make things easier if they have a good idea from somebody else. That's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Back in the
awesome.
old days, somebody with a great idea never got shared around.
Yeah, yeah, I know it's exactly. So I read that your budget is done. Is that a true statement? Good job.
Our budget has been approved. And our budget for this year, we actually, we sort of battled over it a little bit because we have an increase that's a little bit more of an increase than the line that gets approved by the voters is actually increased by 7.9%. That what the voters approve is the number before any local revenues. After local revenues, our budget's up a little over 6%. And on a statewide basis, the estimate is 8.5% increase in education spending that across the state. And but still, the 6%, we thought it was, a bit hefty, but honestly, we put it on our superintendent to say, what do we need for our kids at this point? And honestly, the pandemic, et cetera, has, this includes, multiple more support people. It also includes some new people. What we found was absolutely impossible was to find substitute teachers. So we're actually trying a new system where we're actually creating a pool of teachers to try to meet our core need of substitutes across the system.
Oh, so that they're hired full time and get assigned?
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
that's a great idea. I would
So
kind
we'll see
of.
if it works. I mean, that's costing us a little bit more money, but if it works well, then we may actually expand it from here. But it's the pandemic. One of the things the pandemic showed us was that it's the classic old American thing. When people are given a hard situation, they often just they rise to the occasion.
They do.
And our system, our teachers, we had people doing so many things that were so outside of their normal work life.
Right.
And they just, they did it. And with a lack of substitute teachers, we had teachers, teaching their class, running over to cover for somebody else. Everybody, the superintendent was in teaching classes, the principal was in teaching classes, just everybody filling any gaps that wherever they could. And so, that was amazing to me, how people, how people came to the call, and they were able to do all that. But that's, that has had it, you do that for several years, and you get a little tired at the end.
Right.
So part of our budget this year was to try to make sure that we have enough resources, not only for our kids to get what they need, but also to support our people.
Now the kids are back in school, are they not? They're all back?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So
and the kids were mostly in school through the whole thing for us.
Oh, were they really? They weren't home?
Yeah.
Oh, good for you.
They were. We started off with, half of the kids coming into school, every kid coming into school 2 days a week initially, where so half of the kids came in like, Monday, Thursday, and the others, Tuesday, whatever. And then that was in the beginning, and then we kept ramping up the amount of time in the school. And so our kids they didn't do as much remote learning as a lot of places, which is great.
Yeah,
but still, our kids are behind where we'd like them to be. So
well, because
we have some catch up work to do.
I felt sorry for the teachers. I think teaching remotely, that's a skill. You need to know how to do that. You just don't go from teaching in a classroom to staring at this computer and being able to reach your kids. And there was no time. They just changed. And I felt sorry for them, because
it
you
was
have
really tough.
Yeah.
And some teachers took to it really quickly, and others had more of a struggle.
Right.
But everybody gave it their all. And honestly, it's sort of a positive in that, the in-person instruction is extremely important, but you can provide some additional things by having, using remote.
Right.
So now that that's a part of our system, we can, where it makes sense, like, we can end up, if we have, if we want to teach a language that we don't actually teach in the school, you can actually have somebody remotely, providing that.
Yep. When I worked in the Department of Ed, I was the deputy commissioner for a couple of years, and I promoted that. And at the time, this was a couple of years ago, nobody was interested, because they wanted their Latin teacher or their French teacher. And what is the difference? I mean, why should you go to the expense of finding that French teacher, share it, and have her reach out, or him reach out to the kids? I didn't understand, but I'm glad.
It can work really well, and it's interesting because I have 4 daughters. They're all grown now, but all 4 went to Burn for high school,
Right.
and they actually had, Burton was kind of early on, moving to making some of those remote classes available. So especially for like AP classes. So I had my kids took multiple AP classes that wouldn't have been available at Burton if it weren't doing remote, and they took them remotely. So
I just think those AP classes are amazing. Thank goodness we're dealing with kids that are more advanced, because I've had friends over the years. Unfortunately, they had the money to send their kid to a private school because the public schools weren't able to help the overachievers, if that's the right word. I don't know, but because they more focused on the other end, and you have to help all the kids. So that's good that they're doing that, because they get bored real quick if they're not challenged. That's great.
But we are going to have, since you brought up the budget, we are going to have a big issue this year, and it's already kind of come up in the legislature, in that, despite our increases in our budget because of the financing system, our equalized tax rate, so the straight tax rate, is actually decreasing significantly this year.
Really?
But but then you have to adjust to get your final tax rate, you have to adjust by the common level of appraisal, the CLA,
Right.
and that's actually killing us right now. So, that our education tax rate's down, but tax rates people are going to pay are up significantly because of the CLA.
And how do you explain that to the taxpayers? Every
That's a
time,
tough one.
yeah, because every time I go to town meeting, there's always somebody's hand goes up. If we are saving all of this money and reducing our spending, how come when it's all put together, we have to pay more? And for those who are doing the job, they sometimes get hurt.
Well, part of it is actually the our education tax rate is down partially because there were big surpluses at the state level in the ed fund, which they're putting towards essentially paying down the tax rate. Because our spending is up, but our tax rate is down, our education tax rate's down. But that's partially because the state is putting that money to bring it down. But honestly, and that goes through a finalization process, whether it determines what they call the yield.
Right.
And I'm scared to death that the legislature is going to decide that, oh, well, with education tax rates down, we don't need to use all that money to reduce it, because the CLAs are just eating up everybody all over the place.
Well,
Most of our towns had a 10-point move in their CLA last year and a 10-point move this year.
Wow.
Which is huge.
Wow, that's huge. Yes. Sad to say, I
so
understand it. I was talking to the Mayor Allaire before you and I spoke, and there's a mandated reappraisal going on because all of these New Yorkers and others came in and bought houses way above their value, which is going to do something to the state property values, and that could be a problem.
Yeah. My town CLA went from like 110 to 110 to 91 to 81. And we had already, I'm on the select board, so we had already, it's hard to get an appraisal scheduled. So we've already hired and scheduled our appraisers for 2025.
Oh, that's great, because they're few and far between. They're not, the states mandated it, but there's nobody around to do it. So, do you have any sense? Do you have any sense of what the pupil weighting factor, how they've changed? The weighting factor is going to impact your schools? Because I'm concerned about that. I've been tracking that, and I understand why they did it, and I agree with it, but I think the impact's going to surprise people.
Yeah, I was very involved with the pupil weighting, and I think it's the right thing to do. But you're absolutely right. They're in our district. Actually, within our supervisory union, the Conica Green, we're probably going to have a small. It'll be a small plus for us. Right. But we have one of our school districts within the BRSU is Win Hall, which is up by Stratton and all. Yeah. And they're absolutely going to get, clobbered by the pupil weighting. Right. And there are a lot of towns around which, they built in a something that keeps it from biting all at once. So it, feeds in over time. Right. But it's going to be, I believe that it's absolutely the right thing to do for fairness. Yep. But its impact is going to be pretty significant in a lot of communities. I didn't
agree in the beginning, but then I read a letter by one of the JFO people, and she was so clear that by the time I finished reading it, I said, oh, she's right, this is the right thing to do, and I'm going to circulate that on with friends and stuff so they can read it too, because otherwise it's so confusing, you don't get it. And she put it in such a way that it got through my thick skull, and I support it. But I think the impact's going to be surprising some folks.
Now, it's the research that was behind the pupil weighting study was really good.
Yeah, that
And,
was Dr.
and that
from
was,
UVM.
yeah,
Yeah, great
Tammy
stuff.
Colby up at
Yeah.
UVM.
Yes,
She, she did a great job, and I've got to hand it to her and the legislature who brought her in and all that stuff, that
right,
she not only did a great job, but that she was constantly available to
right.
answer questions.
Yeah, and she was
I think that
articulate at explaining it, and she would take the time to explain it, which needs explaining. So anyway,
Yep.
we have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to know if there's anything you wanted to talk about that we've touched on, what you think's
Well,
going to happen this year in the legislature, or things that we should wrap up with.
well, the legislature, it's interesting because last year my school district, the VSBA, everybody else pleaded with the legislature to not do too much on education last year. And there was a lot done on education. Some of it really needed to be done, and it's very good. But and the pupil weighting factors was one of those.
Right.
But with the legislature, what we need at the local level, we have so much to implement that it's a pretty big burden to accomplish everything that the
Right.
legislature has kind of laid on us. So that always tends to be an issue, and so I tend to be worried. One of our local legislators, I told you before, one of our local legislators once upon a time, sitting next to me, and she said, you probably think that we do way too little in Montpelier. And I said, no, I think you do way too much in Montpelier.
Exactly.
And
I agree with
so
you.
that's a big issue. The other issue is, again, this is tying into independent schools, since we're
Right.
focused on independent schools and all, is there's, the organization that I represent, the Vermont School Board Association, sit on the board. I'm the treasurer. I have a lot of respect for the Vermont School Board Association. But on this issue of the approach to independent schools, they're in a slightly different place than I am, which is fine. I mean, the organization is operated as a democratic institution, and people vote on what the positions are. And so a couple of us who view that independent schools, more positively than others, we've been trying to make our point and trying to make sure everybody understands, but it's tough. It's difficult for people to put themselves in your shoes.
Right.
But one of the key things that we continue to try to locally, and speaking with others to have folks understand, is the push of the VSBA is that why shouldn't independent schools have to do everything a public school needs to do in terms of laws, rules, regulations, etc.
Right.
And it sounds nice and fair and easy, but I keep coming back to public schools. I am a public school supporter, and public schools were created and are controlled and ruled and all by their municipal entities.
Right.
They're a governmental entity. And the independent schools are basically, almost all not for profit.
Right.
And they're fundamentally different beasts. We are talking sort of apples and oranges here. And to ask a not for profit organization to follow everything that a governmental entity needs to do is just doesn't quite ring right to me. I think that there is great interest in ensuring that, like, independent schools, one of the things that we hear a lot is that we want greater accountability and transparency. And to me, I look at a school like Burton and I say, actually, they've done a whole lot over a number of years to be more accountable and more transparent.
Great.
And I think that's a step in the right direction. And I think that, it's a fair thing to ask for accountability and transparency, but to say that in order to get there, you have to act just like a public school. It doesn't make sense to me that that's the way to get there. I think if you want accountability and transparency, then we should focus on what that actually means
Right.
for the independent schools.
I
So-
agree with you, because those words get thrown around and half the time you don't know what are you talking about? What do you mean? I agree.
Exactly. It's, nowadays, if you need to step back and say, what are you really trying to accomplish here?
Right.
And why don't we try to figure out what will accomplish that without, essentially, potentially, putting, think about it, a basic, not a very significant, Burton's a very large not-for-profit organization.
Right.
If you start saying, well, your whole board needs to be elected by the voters of the town, that doesn't really quite fit. And then, how about the fundraising and the, I think, saying that they should be accountable and transparent, great. But what advantage are we getting by, people want them to, have an elected board and to have their entire budget on a line-by-line basis approved by the voters every year?
Yeah, Jim, I hope
And
you
it's-
keep speaking your mind here, because we are certainly on the same wavelength, and I really appreciate it. I think the School Board Association needs to hear the other side, I think, and that's great service. So I have to wind up our talk because it's an hour. I thank you so much for this conversation. I hope we meet in person someday. Keep chatting. Thank you. Oh, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. Thank you for tuning in. See ya.